Good morning. It's good to be here. It's good to see everybody out here today. And I am glad to be here today with you. We're continuing our sermon series on the Sermon on the Mount and the idea that Jesus takes this message and just turns the world upside down on its head. Today we're going to continue with what we started with last week, which was the Beatitudes. If you remember, last week we started with the Beatitudes, and I want to start today with a little bit of recapping about those. In Matthew chapter 5, verses 3 through 6 is where you'll find the first four Beatitudes. If you remember, I referred to them as kingdom attitudes. I really like that idea. I'm going to keep driving that idea home. Kingdom attitudes. It's the attitudes we're supposed to have as we try to help God, or as we bring forth the kingdom with God. Let's say it that way. So if you remember right, our first four kingdom attitudes that we talked about last week were poor in spirit, meek, being mournful, and hungering and thirsting for righteousness. And I think those four are really key to what Jesus is trying to get across. And the next four we're not going to gloss over, but we're going to go through them a little bit quicker and kind of tie this all back together as one group of a message from Jesus. So if you brought your Bibles, we're just going to jump right into it. If you brought your Bibles, we're going to be in chapter 5 of Matthew today. And we're going to be looking at verses 7 through 10 in particular right now. We're going to read verses 7 through 10 of Matthew chapter 5. Starting in verse 7, it says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. And blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." So we're just going to dive right into this. The fifth attitude that Jesus is talking about, this fifth beatitude, if you will, is being merciful. This is a natural product of the previous four beatitudes. If you think about it, right? If we focus on the previous four beatitudes, then we are drawing ourselves closer and closer to Christ. And if we draw ourselves closer and closer to Christ, we become more and more like Him. And as we become more and more like Christ, we become more and more grateful in our hearts. And our hearts become more and more full of mercy. And as they become more and more full with mercy, they overflow mercy to others. And this is just a natural byproduct of following those first four beatitudes. The person who experiences God's mercy will have no choice but to share that mercy because it's such a blessing to them. Now, the sixth attitude is being pure in heart. Pure in heart simply means unspotted, unstained, unblemished. It doesn't require a whole lot of explanation. It means being exactly what it says. Pure in heart. Living a life that's following Jesus and not following sin. It's pretty simple. It's pretty basic. And the seventh attitude involves peacemaking. And this involves a conciliatory spirit that helps people get right with God and right with each other. This is a person that has a spirit that wants to counsel people and help people find a better way, a better path, and bring people closer to God and bring people closer to each other. And it's pretty obvious to most people. I think the idea of keeping peace with others is a good thing. Would you agree? Sounds like a pretty good idea. And then the last attitude that we have here, stated by Christ, now this one's a little bit harder to swallow, right? This is the one that gets tricky. Those first three this morning are pretty basic and pretty easy. But this one's a little bit harder. This attitude is about the persecuted. If we live according to the first 7 attitudes that Jesus has told us, it is likely in our lives that we will experience some sort of persecution. But let's be cautious here. Let's be cautious for a second. We don't want to fall into the trap of equating persecution with righteous living. Some people are persecuted because they have objectionable personalities, not because they're being persecuted. Okay? Some people seek self-righteousness, and they have very abrasive personalities to go along with it, and then they claim that they're being persecuted, yet they're not being persecuted. Being persecuted because of righteousness means that we are persecuted because we are so much like Jesus, and we know Jesus experienced persecution because the world doesn't like the idea of turning the plan upside down. And that's why you get persecuted. You get persecuted because you look so much like Jesus. You look so much like his message, so much like your life. Your lifestyle is so much like his, not because of an abrasive personality. So let's not fall into that trap. So this list of kingdom attitudes is a completely different approach to righteousness, both for the Jews back then and for us today. See, our primary association when it comes to righteousness is with action. We think of actions. We think of things that people do. This is because our real and our physical, everyday world deals with people that we can see, we can touch, we can smell, we can interact with, but they don't necessarily see the heart. We forget, though, that just because we can't see each other's hearts, we forget that God can. See, God is very real and very interactive, and we can experience him, and he not only sees our actions, but he sees our heart as well. So, for example, people might say, I do not support Hollywood, so I'm not going to go to the movies, I'm not going to watch movies, and instead I'm going to take my time to tell people about Christ. Well, that person must be righteous then, right? But in Jesus' list of attitudes, he's dealing primarily with righteous attitudes that produce righteous actions. Christ is trying to grow us. So instead of living the previous example, we should maybe say instead, I desire to have a pure heart, so I will be careful what I watch. Or, I am a peacemaker, so I will share the gospel with people around me. See, when you put the emphasis where Christ wants it, there will be a natural overflow to produce the right action. See, understanding the difference between external and internal righteousness is key to us understanding what Christ is trying to do here in the Sermon on the Mount. Christ is not negating externals. He's not doing away with externals. He's not saying these don't count for anything. They're still very, very important. It's very, very important for us to be the salt and the light to the world. We are called to do that so others can see our internals through the externals that we're doing. However, if we have only externals to show, this can be a problem. If we only have externals and no internal foundation for the actions that we're doing outside, this is not good. This is no better than what the Pharisees were doing. This is exactly what the Pharisees were doing. And Jesus told them, you missed the point. You missed the point of the law. Perhaps we think about it this way. If you're watching online, you have to think of like a computer store. Here, we can think of a computer store. We have Micro Center. Not advertising for them, but we have Micro Center close by. Most of us know who they are. Think about this. You wake up one day and you want to get a new computer. And you cruise on over to Micro Center and you go in and you find somebody and you see a display advertising the brand new MacBook Pro. So you go up and you start talking to the salesman. You're kind of excited about it. And the salesman's telling you all about the computer. He's telling you all about the specs. He's telling you how many terabytes the hard drive is, how many gigabytes the RAM is, how many cores the processor has, what its hyper-threading speed is. He's telling you about the graphics card that's on it. He's talking to you about the magnesium aluminum composite that builds up the case for it. And you're like super excited. He's telling you the aspect ratio of the display and how many pixels it can put across and what kind of quality that is and everything. And you're like, you just get really excited. And you tell him, I'm ready for a test run. Let's turn this thing on and see what it can do. And the salesman says, wait a minute. See, the new MacBook Pro it's really just for show. It's not really meant to be run. We don't really turn them on. You'd probably look at them and go, what a joke. I mean, why would you build a computer that you put all this really nice stuff into and you could talk about it and you could look at it, but to never turn it on, to never use what's internal inside of it, just for show? That's why it's important for us to focus on the external as well as the internal. Because when we only focus on the external, the actions that we're doing, and we're not focused on the internal, our own hearts, what's going on there, the rest of the world can see that. And they look at us and they say, what a joke. Christ gives excellent examples of external versus internal righteousness. Remember, Jesus did not come to get rid of the law, but rather to bring a mature, more complete understanding to it. According to Matthew 5, if we move on later on, verses 21 through 26, he says, sin is more than murder. It's the anger that produced the murder. In verses 27 through 32, he says, sin is more than adultery. It's the lust that produced the adultery. In verses 33 through 37, he says, sin is more than breaking oaths, but it's the lack of integrity that caused the oath to be broken. And in verses 38 through 48, he says, sin is more than improper retribution, but it's the lack of love and concern for others that prompted the retribution. See the important truth that Christ is trying to communicate, that he's trying to get across to the people that were around him at the time and to us today, is that it's not just something that we do. See, it's the nature that we have been born with. We are not sinners because we sin. We sin because we are sinners. I'll say that again. We are not sinners because we sinned. We sin because we are sinners. That's what Jesus is trying to get across. It's the hatred that produces murder, not murder that produces the hatred. It's the lust that produces adultery, not the adultery that produces the lust. We could go on and on. Jesus said in Matthew 7:17 that a bad tree can't produce, or can't but produce bad fruit. A bad tree can't but produce bad fruit. The tree is rotten to the core, and so are we without Christ in our lives. So what does he mean a bad tree can't produce but bad fruit? As I study that, I always think of growing up in Yuma, Arizona. And if you spent any kind of amount of time in Yuma, living in Yuma, you pick up on some things about agriculture because it's like 50% of the GNP for the city. There's a lot of agriculture around. And what are the agricultural processes that they do down there? Citrus. That doesn't really sell anywhere. It's not very economical, but they grow a lot of citrus. And one thing you know if you grew up in Yuma is you'll see grapefruit trees all over the place, like in front of businesses and stuff like that. And you know not to eat the grapefruit off that tree. But Yuma has a lot of people that move in and out because of the 2 military bases and different things. And we would have people that would move in, and they'd like, we see grapefruit growing on all these trees. Yeah. Can you just go up and pick it? Sure. They would go and pick the grapefruit. And they'd go, that was the worst grapefruit in the world. We'd be like, yeah. We don't pick them. Because those trees aren't meant to produce fruit. See, the grapefruit trees, they're not regular grapefruit trees. They're a grapefruit tree that has been grown to be disease resistant, rot resistant, insect resistant, plague resistant. They're resistant to everything because they're a hardy stock. But that makes the grapefruit horrible. Inside, you'll peel back a rind that's almost a ½ inch or thicker. That's a huge rind. And inside, you will find this little pulp mass, like an orange, that's kind of pinkish in color, but it's woody, and it's dry, and it tastes bad. Because those trees aren't grown for that fruit. See, what they do is when the tree is really young, they grow that tree, and when it's really young, about yay high, that's a technical term, yay high, They will go in on a branch, or usually on the main trunk, and they'll make a small incision with a scalpel. And in that, they will either put in a seed or a branch of whatever citrus tree they want to grow. Lemons, oranges, limes, tangelos, migniolas, whatever. And then that tree will grow out of the tree, but it will use that grapefruit stalk. It'll use that grapefruit's roots. It'll use that grapefruit's trunk because it's disease resistant, it's pest resistant, it's hardy. The other trees aren't. And this is how they grow citrus. See, a bad tree can fake produce fruit that looks good, but it's not. It actually isn't. And the test is in what the tree is, not in what the fruit is. So likewise, Christ truly tests us by our heart. What is in our heart? What seed did we plant in there? How can this type of righteousness be attained? That's the big question, right? How can we attain righteousness if it's not our outward actions? Well, a righteousness that saves is obtained the same way our everyday righteousness is, through Christ and Christ alone. We only receive righteousness through Christ as it comes down from God. We already realize that the spiritually bankrupt people without Christ don't have righteousness. It is our realization of this reality and our reliance on Christ that allows us to live righteously. It is this bankruptness that we find in ourselves that allows us to engage Christ and allow Him to plant the seed in our heart, if you will. Consider Galatians 5. There are fruits of the Spirit and fruits of the flesh. We naturally produce fruits of the flesh. We do that naturally. That's who we are. But the fruits of the Spirit, the good fruits, are only produced by walking by the Spirit. And if we go to the end of that, Galatians 5:23, it says, against such things there is no law. This is what Christ is talking about. There's no law, there's no rule, there's no standard that can produce righteousness in you. That's not what it's about. It's only Christ that can do it. Internal righteousness is given, not earned. It's not something that we could manifest. It's only something that Christ can give us. So how does this play out in our everyday lives? Well, how many times have we apologized to our spouse or to someone for the angry words that we muttered? But we ignored the attitude of anger in our own hearts that produced those words. How many times have we looked at a picture or a movie that possibly we shouldn't have seen, and then we asked for redemption, but we didn't deal with the lust that produced the action? I could go on and on and on with examples. But the idea is here. The point is this. We, like the Pharisees, we become doctors who treat symptoms and not the disease. Christ wants to treat the disease. Christ wants us to be free from the disease, and He wants us to let Him in so He can treat the disease. Otherwise, we'll never get better. Perhaps you're sitting here today and this message meant something to you. Perhaps you're watching and this message means something to you. And you're looking into your own heart and you go, you know what? I planted the wrong seed. That's okay. It's okay. We all came from the same stock. We're all sinners. That's okay. There is a plan to get the right seed in your heart. There is a plan that will replenish the fruit that you produce into something better and to bring Christ's righteousness into your hearts today. There's a lot of us here that know that plan. There's some of us here that have forgotten that plan. There's some of us that maybe pruned the wrong part of the tree off. And we need to get it back. It's okay. I want to encourage you that if you have questions about how to bring Christ into your heart and how to become a Christian and how to have Christ's righteousness and to live that life, I want to encourage you to reach out to me or to Nathan. Our phone numbers are online on the website. Our emails are on there if you're watching. If you're here, I'll be outside after church. Stop and talk to me. I'm more than willing to talk to anybody about anything. Call us, text us, whatever you got going on. You can even send smoke signals. I know Nathan's fluent in smoke signals. We've all gotten pretty good at smoke signals recently with the fires. So. I want to encourage you, though. I want to encourage you, please reach out. Don't go another day in life producing bad fruit. Nobody wants to eat that grapefruit. You don't want to eat that grapefruit. And there's no reason you should. Step away from that. Let us talk to you. Let us give you a plan. Let us help you find how to produce good fruit and have righteousness in your heart. Will you pray with me? Lord, help us to seek you first, last, and always in our lives. Lord, let us check our hearts and not try to build our own righteousness, but realize that righteousness only comes from you. Let us check our egos, our outward works, our desires for accolades. Let's check those at the door. Let us live our life in accordance with your Son's teachings and your Son's will, so that we can do your work, so we can share your message and your mercy, the mercy that you gave us. It is through your Son, Jesus, that we come to you in prayer. Amen.